I'm suffering from a soccer injury, so I'm going to sit down and talk, if that's okay with everybody. Let me begin by thanking the organizers for an opportunity to come here today. I've traveled to 62 countries in the world, but this is my first time to Australia, and I feel like I've missed out. I should have done this a long time ago. It's a wonderful country, wonderful people, and I'm very glad to be here. Yes, trafficking has been around for a long time. My first experience was when I was 5 years old, when my mother explained to me the story of how her mother was traveling from Germany on her way to Los Angeles to meet up with her husband. In Chicago, she thought she had arrived in Los Angeles, and she was going around saying, "Is there somebody who can tell me, am I in Los Angeles? Am I in Los Angeles?" But she spoke in German, and nobody understood what she was saying. Finally, a German person came up and said, "Yes, your husband told me to take you to him. Come with me." He was a trafficker, or what they used to call a white slaver back then. If my grandmother had gone with him, I wouldn't be here right now. Actually, what happened, another German couple saw what was going on, intervened. They got her back on the train. She made it to Los Angeles. That family became my godparents for my sister. And it turned out to be one of the more happy stories. But in many cases, that's not the case, as you saw in the previous presenter's presentation. I have another question for you. How many of you have seen the movie Pinocchio? The Disney movie Pinocchio? Okay, if you remember, Pinocchio has some scenes where it's virtually a trafficking scenario, where young Pinocchio is lured into a situation to first go up on stage and sing and then put in a cage, and then later on to go to Paradise Island. Now that movie is one of the scariest movies for children, and the reason why it's so memorable is because it's scary. So we've all been exposed to kind of the evils of human trafficking, often at a very young age. And it's something that basically, I think the reason why it's so scary is because we're talking about a situation where people lose control of their lives because there's other people who are manipulating a situation for that end. And that's part of the reason why trafficking is so frightening. I'm going to go through a very quick presentation. I won't talk about sex trafficking because it was just discussed. I'll talk about a few other forms of trafficking and then talk a little bit about what my project does, and a little bit about the global financial crisis, and then I'll end there because I think it's important for the questions to be the driving force of what it is that we talk about tonight so that you can be included in the process. Who gets trafficked? Well, actually men, women, and children. And the reason why I have to include men in there is that there are a lot of countries in the world that don't allow for a man to be perceived as a trafficking victim. I'll give an example of that. In Thailand, basically if a factory is raided and people are in slave-like circumstances, oftentimes the men are put on a bus and sent back to wherever they came from, and the women and children are given support. Fortunately, that's changed in the last year, but not all countries have that. It started from a foundation of sex trafficking, and for the most part, trafficking was discovered because of HIV/AIDS. For a long time, the brothels were there, but nobody bothered to go into the brothels to kind of ask the questions, how did you get here? Once public health people started going in because they needed to do health remedies for condom use and so forth, they started asking the question, and all of a sudden they heard these stories. It's the same with men now in trafficking in fishing boats and so forth, where we're just now beginning to find out about it because we're asking the questions. Perhaps if we went into agricultural situation and spent more time with domestic workers, we'd find more, but it's out there and it's very prevalent. To give you a couple of examples of labor exploitation, a typical scenario that you'll find in the Mekong region where I work is a person from Myanmar or Burma will cross over into Thailand and make their way to a place called Samut Sakhon. They find a factory, they knock on the door, and they say, "Okay, I'd like to work here. How much can I get?" And the employer says, "Okay, well, I'll give you $50 a month, but you have to stay within the facility." That person has never seen $50 a month. It seems like a tremendous amount of money. He goes inside, he works for 2 months, he then goes and asks for his pay, and the employer says, "I'm sorry, you owe me money. To stay here costs $54. So every month you work, you owe me an additional $4. So you have people who are virtually enslaved within factories because of this debt bondage approach, and they can't get out. There's barbed wire all the way around, And for the most part, they are beaten if they try to escape and so forth. So that's one example. Another example is in the fisheries, where you find a lot of men who find their way down to the coast in Thailand. I'll use Thailand as an example because, again, it's a destination site. It's a country that has higher socioeconomic circumstances, so people are drawn to that. They get onto a boat. They are told that they will get paid a certain amount of money. For 2 years, they're at sea. They don't touch land once. When they come back, after terrible conditions, and in many cases, they face situations where they're beaten, and if they get sick, they get thrown off. If they complain too much, they get thrown off. And terrible, terrible circumstances. When they get back, they go for their money, and the employer basically says, I'm sorry, I don't have to pay you. You're an illegal migrant in this country. Go tell the police if you want. They're just going to put you across the border. So you have an individual who gave up 2 years of his life, and then for the most part has no opportunity to recoup on anything. Perhaps he was the sole breadwinner for a family, and the expectation that money was going to come back and debt was incurred during the time that he was away. So once again, you have a terrible situation that you find people in that is all over Asia and quite prevalent all over the world as well. Some of the elements of trafficking that are important to talk about is that there's often a movement or a transport of a person from one place to the other. It often results in something that is slavery-like, and I'll talk a little bit about the importance of that later. A person loses control of their life. Now imagine if you were in a situation where somebody talked you into going off someplace, you arrived there, and then a chain of events took place that resulted in you no longer having control of your life. Your life was taken away from you. If you try to go to the left or to the right, people are controlling you. For the most part, this lack of control is really what trafficking is about. How people who are victims no longer have control over their own destiny for a period of time. Why do they take people from one place to another? Well, if you go from a country like Cambodia, where they speak Khmer, to Thailand, you can do all kinds of abusive things to that person because that person can't tell anyone because they don't speak the same language. And so that's part of the kind of reason why foreign people from foreign lands, they're disoriented, they don't know the system, they may be disliked by the local people, they don't speak the same language. As a result of that, they find themselves in a situation where they can't tell anyone. They're trapped. Even if they could get out of the factory or out of the house that they're in, they simply can't tell anyone.